The story begins with Marina, a young woman who had just moved into an old house she inherited from her grandmother. The house was located in a forgotten village, surrounded by silence and shadows. It was massive, filled with antique furniture and a heavy, unsettling atmosphere. But Marina ignored the warnings from the villagers. They all said something in that house should never be disturbed. Marina ran down the hallway, but the corridors seemed endless. The whispers grew louder, closer, as if they were right behind her. She reached the front door, desperately pulling at it. When it finally opened, she fell into a dark, endless void. The last thing she heard was the sound of laughter echoing around her. The next morning, the villagers found the house empty. The locked door upstairs was now wide open, and the doll was sitting in the living room. Its smile was wider. Since then, people say the house is cursed. Anyone who dares to enter hears Marina's voice echoing in the hallways, and the doll seems to move from room to room. A year later, 1 year later, 3 friends, Joan, Clara, and Raphael, decided to investigate the house. They were curious thrill seekers, dismissing the story of Marina as nothing but a myth. With flashlights and cameras, they entered the house. The door was strangely unlocked. As they stepped inside, the air felt heavy, suffocating. Clara, the most sensitive of the group, whispered, "It feels like someone's watching us." "Relax," Joan said, forcing a laugh. "It's just an old house." They climbed the stairs to the second floor. At the end of the hallway, they saw the famous door. It was slightly ajar. Inside the room, everything was as described. The rocking chair, the claw marks on the walls, and the porcelain doll. But something was different. The doll wasn't just sitting there. It was staring directly at them. Its eyes, once lifeless, now seemed to glimmer in the darkness. Raphael laughed nervously and picked up the doll. "It's just a stupid doll," he said. But as soon as he touched it, he froze. A cold whisper brushed against his ear. "Give me back." Raphael dropped the doll in shock. The others didn't hear the whisper, but they noticed his pale expression. "We should go," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I don't like this place." As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them. Their flashlights flickered and whispers filled the hallway. "You shouldn't be here." The doll fell to the floor, but when they looked down, it was gone. Clara screamed, pointing to the staircase. The doll was now standing at the top of the stairs, its smile wider and filled with small, sharp teeth. Panic set in as they tried to run, but the corridors seemed to twist and stretch. Joan reached the front door, but the handle burned his hand. "You'll never leave!" Clara was suddenly pulled backward by an invisible force. Joan and Raphael tried to grab her, but it was too late. She was dragged into the dark room, her screams fading into silence. Joan and Raphael escaped the house, but neither of them was ever the same. Raphael disappeared weeks later, leaving behind only a note. "She's calling me." The house still stands today, silent, waiting. And the doll? It's still there, smiling, waiting for its next visitor. It was a Wednesday when I first noticed something wasn't right. The night air was cold, enough to make my hands tremble as I clutched my bag. Walking through the nearly empty streets toward my apartment, I felt a creeping unease. It wasn't the first time I'd sensed it, eyes on me, lurking just beyond my vision. But every time I looked back, all I saw were the long shadows of trees stretching under the streetlights. That night, the footsteps weren't a figment of my imagination. They were real. They mirrored mine, hesitant enough to feel deliberate. I turned down a side street I rarely used, hoping to avoid the noise of the main road. And then I heard them again, faster this time, echoing on the cracked asphalt behind me. I took a deep breath, pretending to check my phone, angling the screen to catch any movement behind me. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, hovered at the edge of the street lamp's glow. My mind raced. Who is that? Why are they following me? The next evening, I tested my paranoia. I took an entirely different route home, weaving through alleys and looping around blocks. But as I passed an empty square, the familiar rhythm of footsteps returned. This time, they were more cautious, keeping just far enough to stay hidden. My chest tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. By the third night, I'd had enough. I left work early, determined to confront whoever was behind this. As I neared my apartment, I spotted the figure again, this time standing at the corner under a flickering street lamp. They didn't move. They didn't hide. It felt deliberate, as if they wanted me to know they were there. I froze. My breath hitched as I stared at the figure, my instincts screaming at me to run. Instead, I bolted to my building, fumbling with my keys and locking the door behind me. My building's security cameras were broken, something the landlord had brushed off weeks ago as not a priority. That thought alone sent a chill down my spine. Later that night, as the city's usual hum faded, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were slow, deliberate, each one making my heart pound harder. I crept to the peephole, my hands shaking, and there they were, standing right outside my door. The figure didn't knock or speak. They just stood there, their face obscured by the hood of their jacket, the faint glow of the hallway light reflecting off their shadowed face. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare at them through the tiny lens, praying they wouldn't try to come inside. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, they tilted their head, almost like they knew I was watching. My blood turned to ice. It was a stormy night, and the streets of the small town were completely deserted. I was home alone, listening to the wind howling through the cracks in the windows. The rain pounded against the glass with force, while flashes of lightning briefly illuminated the dark sky. Around 11 p.m., I heard a knock on the front door. It was strong and rhythmic, completely out of sync with the sound of the storm. My heart raced. Who would be knocking at the door on a night like this? I waited, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, but the knock came again, this time more insistent. I mustered up some courage, turned on the hallway light, and walked toward the door. Before opening it, I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. All I could see was the rain falling and the darkness of the street. Even so, the feeling of being watched paralyzed me. Another loud sound echoed, this time as if something had fallen on the porch. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice faltering at the end. No response. Grabbing a flashlight and against every instinct, I opened the door. The flashlight's beam cut through the night, revealing nothing but the heavy rain falling in torrents. I was about to shut the door when I noticed something unusual. In the middle of the lawn, there was a figure. Tall, thin, and dressed in a long black coat, they stood motionless, staring at me, though I couldn't quite see their eyes. "Are you lost?" I asked. No answer. I took a step back, my hand gripping the doorknob, ready to slam the door shut. But before I could, a flash of lightning briefly lit up the figure. And in that moment I realized they weren't wet. Not a single drop of rain touched them. I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. Rushing to the window, I peeked through the curtains. They were still there, closer now, standing at the edge of the porch. Their face was partially obscured by the shadow of their hat, but it looked like they were smiling, as if they knew I was watching. And then, without warning, they raised a hand and pointed directly at me. At that exact moment, my phone rang, nearly making me jump out of my skin. I answered without thinking, and a low, raspy voice said, "You shouldn't have opened the door." It began 2 weeks ago, though I didn't notice it at first. The sense of being watched, the small, almost imperceptible signs, a shadow moving in my peripheral vision, a faint knock at my window on the second floor. At the time, I dismissed it as exhaustion or paranoia, but now, as I sit here in the dim glow of my living room lamp, I know it wasn't my imagination. Last night, it became undeniable. I had come home late from work, exhausted, and the rain had started as I turned onto my street, light at first, but by the time I reached my house, it was a downpour. I parked, grabbed my bag, and made a run for the door, fumbling with my keys in the dark. That's when I felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I froze, the keys slipping from my hand. Slowly, I turned. Across the street, beneath the dim halo of a flickering street lamp, stood a figure. They were completely still, head tilted slightly, their silhouette distorted by the rain. I couldn't see their face, but they were facing me, watching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the rain. No response. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, as if waiting for something. I grabbed my keys from the wet ground, heart pounding, and bolted inside, slamming the door behind me. The rest of the night was restless. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window felt amplified. I checked the locks 3 times and peered out through the curtains, but the figure was gone. Tonight, it got worse. It started with the sound of footsteps in the attic. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the sound didn't stop. Slow, deliberate steps echoed above me as if someone was pacing back and forth. I grabbed a flashlight and a knife from the kitchen, my pulse thundering in my ears as I climbed the stairs. The attic door was slightly ajar. That alone made my blood run cold. It was always closed. I pushed it open with the flashlight, the beam cutting through the stale air of the attic. "Is someone there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. I scanned the room, my flashlight landing on boxes and old furniture. Just as I was about to leave, I saw it. A handprint on the dusty attic window. Fresh, clear, and unmistakably human. That's when I heard the knock. Not at the door, not at a window. It came from the attic wall. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself as I bolted down the stairs, locking the attic door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no one in the attic. No footprints. No evidence anyone had been there. And yet, as I sit here, trying to convince myself I'm safe, my phone buzzes with a notification. It's a picture. It's me, sitting here in my living room. The message beneath it reads, "I'm already inside." A night as dark as pitch. The moon barely peeks through the dense clouds. You are lying in bed, feeling the weight of the day, but something feels off. A slight shiver runs down your spine as the wind blows through the slightly open window, bringing with it a strange sound, as if someone is whispering your name. The shadows of the trees outside dance on the wall, creating almost human-like shapes. You close your eyes, trying to ignore it. It's just your imagination. But then, something moves in the corner of the room. A shadow, small but unmistakable. You open your eyes suddenly, looking at the corner. Nothing, just darkness. But the sound of slow footsteps begins to echo down the hallway. They are spaced out, as if whoever is walking is hesitating. The sound is muffled, like someone walking barefoot. Each step seems closer. The bedroom door, slightly ajar, creaks softly, revealing an even deeper darkness in the hallway. You think about getting up, but your body feels heavy, pinned to the mattress. The feeling of being watched becomes almost unbearable. You look at the door, and it moves again, now opening a little more. Cold breath touches the back of your neck. The whisper is no longer at the window, it's right behind you. A hoarse voice mutters something incomprehensible. You want to scream, but you can't. Instead, your eyes widen as a pale hand appears at the edge of the mattress. Slow, as if testing your reaction. Long fingernails scratch the fabric of the sheet, emitting a piercing sound that echoes in the silence. With a single flash of courage, you turn to face whatever is there. But nothing could have prepared you for what you see. A disfigured face, sunken and glowing eyes, with a twisted smile that seems beyond human. The smell of mold and decay fills your nostrils. It doesn't speak. It just stands there, staring, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. Before you can react, everything disappears. You wake up in a cold sweat, lying in bed. Was it a dream? But the door is ajar, exactly as in the vision. And in the corner of the room, you see something that shouldn't be there. And then, The whisper returns, now closer. A low, chilling laugh echoes through the darkness as the shadow approaches. Good night. Mark never believed in ghosts. He laughed at the old legends of his small town in northern England, stories of restless spirits and haunted houses. But everything changed on that cold autumn night when he found himself alone in his late grandmother's house, a decrepit mansion on the edge of the forest. He was there to sort through her belongings. The electricity flickered, leaving only the dim glow of an old oil lamp to push back the darkness. As he moved through the dust-covered furniture, he heard something, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Mark!" He spun around. Nothing, just the wind seeping through the broken windows. Chuckling nervously, he shook his head. His imagination was playing tricks on him, but then he heard it again, closer this time. "Mark, help me!" A chill ran down his spine. The whisper was coming from the attic. He hesitated, but something, curiosity, fear, urged him up the creaking stairs. He pushed open the attic door. It was empty, except for an old rocking chair gently swaying back and forth. Then, a loud bang. The door slammed shut behind him, and in the dusty mirror across the room, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice, something that should not have been there. What did Mark see? No one knows. By morning, the house was empty. No sign of him remained. Just the chair, still rocking ever so slowly, and a whisper in the wind. "Mark, come with me. Good night, if you can sleep."